Welcome to another Liquid Bullet Productions. Joining me today, got a great guest for you, former world martial artist, Amazon bestseller author, bodyguard, bouncer, co-organiser of the Festival of Martial Arts and public speaker, Mr. Matt Stait. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Lee. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, Matt, we've got quite a bit to get through, quite some interesting stuff here. Before we jump straight into that, can I just roll you back to the beginning, a little bit of sort of your background of where you was born and where you was brought up, etc.?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I talk about this lot, so there's lots of that information out there. I mean, essentially, I come from growing up on sort of council estates, moved around quite a bit, broken family, all that sort of thing, quite a lot of unpleasantness at the time, which is why I wanted to get into martial arts, because it was one of those where, as a kid, I was looking at things where I could sort of escape the situation that I was in. And I was a big fan of Tarzan at the time and Spider-Man, but, I wasn't going to get adopted by a group of marauding apes or bitten by a radioactive spider. But the one thing that, did seem real and possible was martial arts. At the time, Bruce Lee was on the television, Kung Fu was on, there were some great wrestlers back in the day, Iron Fist and stuff. And I was just always drawn to that right from the word go. And I thought that is something that I can do. So that's a really abbreviated version of what started. But then I sort of, like a lot of teenagers, you dip in and out, you have a go at things. And I tried some boxing and some judo and a few other bits and bobs. But then my father committed suicide, and that's when the decision was made to really sort of get into the martial arts. That became my surrogate family, my peer group, my compass, if you like. And so I owe a great deal to the martial arts, and that's when I started taking it seriously.
Yeah, what sort of age was that happened, Matt?
Oh, that was in my late teens. Yeah.
Late teens.
So it was one of those unfortunate sort of situations where he committed suicide, and up until that point I'd only really known one way of life, which was a working man's way of life. You get paid on a Friday, you go to the bar, you drink yourself silly, get into a fight, that kind of existence. And that's kind of what I knew. And so I had some real significant choices to make at that point. And a lot of the guys that I was with at the time, they're dead or in prison or both. So most of the peer group at that time, they took the wrong path. And I was lucky where, because I chose to follow the martial arts and put my energy into that, I was lucky that I managed to sort of avoid some of the more stupider things, before it was too late. Did a lot of stupid stuff, but before it was too late.
Yeah. Did you find martial arts then, and like, because there's discipline in there and it's sort of like regimental, do you think that's what sort of helped you go down the right path?
Yeah, there was lots of, I mean, you know yourself, right? As a young man, there's this energy within you, there's this competitive nature within you, there's this thing within you, and then you couple that with the anger at the world and stuff that was going on. And I was getting into all kinds of nonsense and fights and all sorts of stuff. And it turns out that martial arts was a really positive outlet for that, because instead of getting told off, I was actually getting praised. But I also had a place to put it, and that was really significant. So instead of just being told no, and then it bubbling out in all the wrong places, it was like, well, okay, that's part of you. Let's point it over there and put it to use. Sorry. So I was just saying that. It was one of those where it gave me a direction to put that kind of energy and that part of me, as a lot of people have, so rather than just disregarding it and saying, no, you can't do that at all, and it coming out in the wrong places, it was actually harnessed and given an outlet and turned into a positive, which at the time was absolutely necessary, because if it hadn't have come out in that way, it would have come out somewhere else.
And so, Matt, can I just ask you, what was the first sort of martial arts you actually took up?
Well, this is going back a long time. I tried a couple of things relatively unsuccessfully, and I wrote about this in my book, Journey Up the Mountain, where as a kid, on a council estate, and back then in the early 80s and the late 70s there wasn't really that much martial arts about, and to find an actual genuine black belt was a rarity, and they were these sort of godlike creatures, but they were few and far between. And it's not like today where there's a club on every corner. So the first part was actually trying to find something, which was really hard. The second part was financing it, because obviously, we didn't have any money, and what money was there wasn't going for my pastimes, let's put it like that. So had a go at some judo, tried that for a bit. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out as well as I would have liked at the time. There was a thing with the instructor, and as a kid, we brought this second-hand uniform, this gi, and it came with an orange belt. So the previous student obviously graded to that point, and so we brought the gi. And I knew that I shouldn't be wearing that belt, but as a small kid, I mean, we're talking sort of 8 or 9, I had absolutely no idea how to do the thing up. So I ended up using the belt because I didn't know any different. And the instructor at the time absolutely bollocked me. He called me out in front of the whole class and said, "You don't deserve to have that. You haven't graded for that. You're disrespecting the club, blah, 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 blah." And that was the end of my judo for a while. I just, I sort of left it with a bad taste in my mouth as a child and thought, that's terrible. I've gone back to it previously and, since, and that's a different story. But that was the first sort of toe in. But there wasn't any kicking. There wasn't any punching and kicking, the stuff on the television. So that was another reason why I was like, oh, perhaps this isn't for me. Then I did some amateur boxing. I did that for a while. And again, no kicking, no punching. Sorry, punching, but no kicking. And so that lasted for a certain amount of time, and it was enjoyable what I did of it. The training was, it was really good. And again, I've gone back to that over the years. And then I tried. We had then that takes us to sort of the early 80s, and the ninja movies of the day that were all.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a ninja in your movie, it was a rubbish movie, right? So everywhere you look, there was these ninjas popping up, and so there was one at my local leisure centre at the time, and I thought, great, I'll give that a try. And I got there a bit late, and I looked through the door, and there was this rather chubby dude in this ninja outfit, and he was, those lizards on hot sand like that. He was running like that around the outside of the sports hall, and he said that was ninja running. So I basically, at that age, I just thought, I'm not doing that. I'm too cool for that. So I left that where it is, and I went on my way. Again, years later, I spent some time with another guy who was very high up within those arts, and he was actually something to see. So this guy that I'm talking about wasn't representative of the whole. But anyway, that takes me along where eventually I managed to find karate, and that became my home for a lot of years, and that was where the sort of foundations were built, if you like. I was very, very lucky to manage to stumble across what was a really good quality school. I didn't know that at the time. It just happened to be there, and so so that was my foundations.
Yeah. What style karate was it, Matt? There's so many different ones, isn't there, nowadays?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that was Wateroo originally.
Yeah.
So that's where I started in. That's where I'd done a lot of the sort of early days of karate was in the Wateroo system, and yeah, I owe it a great deal. I owe the instructors a great deal. There's no question about it. Without those solid foundations, without that, that old-fashioned way of repetitive ingraining those movements into you, I wouldn't, everything else wouldn't have followed on like it did. So I owe it a great deal.
In that system, like from all the way up to black belt, or?
Yeah, I was in and out of that for years. So I ended up doing that for a very long time, and I sort of dipped in and out. So I do it consistently for 5 or 6, 7 years. Then I'd have sort of 8 months, a year off, and then I go back. And I ended up going to a different school after a while, and then I ended up going into more full contact stuff, and that's where it started, that changeover, because I started doing some kickboxing and some. It wasn't MMA back then, because it was, that was the early formation of it, but it was a proximity of, so a group of people doing different things, but all coming together and sharing stuff. And of course, by that stage, I'd started working on the doors and things as well. And my training morphed, as you would expect, into in line with what was required for doing the job that I was doing.
Dear Matt, can I just ask you, how was the transformation or transition from karate into the full contact stuff? Because karate really, like, this more semi-contact sport for like competition, isn't it? I don't know if you entered the competition stuff or.
Yeah, I did loads of competitions back then in those days. Loads of the sort of point stuff and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Well, what again? It's one of those where some of the instructors that I was training with, they had toes in various different elements, and so one or two of them were working doors and things of their own, and had a much more how can I put it? A much more realistic approach to their karate, other than just the sporting side of it, because that is only one element of the whole, isn't it? So
yeah,
it's not as if that's all there is. And so there's different emphases, and people gave different emphasis to the different elements. But the transition for myself was, all joking aside, and this isn't to do anyone else down. For me, I found that in the environment of the doors, in the environment of the nightclubs and bars and things like that, it just wasn't working for me. And
yeah,
what I found wasn't working for me was more the platform, not so much the techniques themselves. It was the platforms. Now we both know of some absolutely superb people in the real world who are karate based, who can really do it. So I'm not dismissing karate at all. The fault is mine for not at that time being able to make it work in the way that I expected it to. I mean, that was one of the biggest shocks. It was like, bugger,
yeah,
this isn't working how I thought it was going to work. And so I had to modify it and adapt it. And of course, being the size that I am as well, obviously what works for a 5'4" guy isn't going to work for me, or at least in the way that it's done. I've got to change that. So that opened up this whole experimental period, and I'm sure that lots of other people are the same and have gone through similarish journeys. I mean, Jeff Thompson was coming to the fore, and there was all this talk about reality stuff, and so it was that kind of time period where lots of experimenting was going on, and lots of people were trying to sort of figure out where they wanted to sit within all those equations. I mean, I've got a huge love for karate still to this day. I mean, I don't look graceful doing kata. I envy the people that do. I haven't dedicated a lifetime to it, so I can't pretend to know everything there is to know. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I genuinely admire seeing it done well.
yeah. I think you touched on a bit of sort of my sort of swap over there as well.
Mm.
I had the same sort of thing went from karate to kickboxing, and like you say, I didn't learn the techniques properly for what they were meant to be for. So when I was trying to do a Yakuzuki punch to the belly in full contact, I soon realised that it wasn't working. And
Yeah.
I had
Well,
to learn the hard way.
yeah. Well, the ring transition. So moving from the mat to the ring, and going from sort of pull the points to full contact. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole physical mechanical difference, isn't it? The delivery system of the punch and everything. And yeah, that was you're either fighting points and getting disqualified for hitting too hard, or you're fighting
Yeah,
full contact and the other person's just laughing at you because you're not doing them any damage. So yeah, that transition, that was really the problem, because it got to a stage where it had to be one thing or another. It couldn't be both.
but Matt, when you said about you started to work on the doors there, um, how did that help in a door in that situation using martial arts for yourself? As in the situations, how did you apply it? Was it working easily straight away, or was it certain moves worked for you and certain moves didn't? How did you
Oh, okay.
work out? How did you work out what was right for you?
Well, there was a couple of points really. Number one, what was interesting was, coming from the background that I did and having the childhood that I did. I was already used to violence, and I don't mean like sport violence or ring violence. I mean genuine, actual violence that you can taste.
Yeah,
Um, and so I already had a certain amount of ability to deal with that because of the way that I grew up. So that was instantly a benefit, because I wasn't having to adjust and learn some of those things. But and then aside from that, it was a case of, well, I'm a big guy, I'm not a small chap. I move, well, not so much now, but I used to move really well for a big guy. And I could hit people. There's no, let's not pretend it's anything other than it is. I could hit people, and if I hit you, you would fall down 9 times out of 10. So that gives you quite a large amount of advantage. But then I found more interestingly was that there was a huge amount of pre-fight stuff going on, the psychology of it, the subconscious stuff within it, the body language, the, you know, all that pre-fight stuff that Jeff talked about in the early 90s when his book started coming out and stuff. But all of that was starting to, you know, like set little things off in my head, because I'd see guys that had never set foot in a gym in their life, but they really knew what they were doing in this environment, and they really knew how to handle themselves way more than you know, a lot of other people that I'd seen. And it was done, what's the word I'm looking for? Not swiftly, that's not quite. It was done in such a way that it was just, it was enough to get it done, and it was done with real intent, but then it was over, you know, and that was that sort of thing. So again, I found all that fascinating, the handling, the aggression, the handling, the build up, all of the subconscious stuff that goes with it. And that became something that I was really interested in, because once you get to a certain point in the physical skills, and I think a lot of people are the same, you know, when it comes to sort of stand-up striking anyway, once you sort of got to a point with that, well, then you're like, well, what's next? You know, what's the next thing to learn? And so all that part of it became really fascinating to me. And that, yeah, that was something that I really got into a lot.
So Matt, can I put you to sort of, we've gone into a bit of your sort of door work there. Can I just ask how did you get involved in door work, and what was it like your first night on a door?
I was asked. I mean, you know, really it's that simple, isn't it? Yeah, it's again, I wrote the book Modern Samurai about when I was my time on the doors, and I sort of go into this in depth. And long story short, yeah, I was asked, and you know, I was doing all right at the club. I was, I say, you know, holding my own sort of thing, and somebody said, do you want to earn some money? And back then it was a couple of quid in your hand, you got invited in, and it was a case of, if you did all right, you know, you might get asked again. If you didn't, then ta-da, you know. So anyway, myself and a friend, we were both asked, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to get paid to chat up girls. This is fabulous. You know, you know, what a lovely way to spend your night, right? But then the sort of butterfly started, and of course, this is the thing with a lot of people. A lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, I could work on a door, mate. It's not that blooming thing. You're all thick as shit," and all the rest of it. You know, all those kind of things that people say.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, it's actually a very challenging role to do well. You know, any idiot can stand there and thump somebody, but you know, you manage a full club full of people with all the problems going on, and you problem solve in that moment, you firefight in that moment. If you can do all of that without knocking the snot out of somebody, which is what you're trying to do, you know, that takes some doing. That's a skill. So so anyway, blah blah blah. It was like, do you want to do it? I'm like, great, yeah, I'd love to. Right. The first time that I went to work, it was back in the shirt and tie days, you know.
Yeah, bow ties.
Yeah, and I ended up wearing a jumper underneath my shirt because I was quite skinny back then, and I thought, I'm gonna look like this beanpole. People aren't going to take me seriously, so I wore this jumper underneath my shirt in the hope that it would sort of bulk me out of it. Anyway, I went and I had nothing. It was a pretty mundane evening. We didn't do anything particularly exciting. Nothing crazy happened. And I was asked back. However, the friend that I was asked to, who was asked the same time as me, he went to a different club on the other end of town, and he ended up getting shot at. Some people went past. Yeah, nothing serious. Air rifle. They shot at him with an ear rifle and threw half a brick at him because they'd thrown some kids out. But that was enough for him to say never again, and he never ever worked another door after that. I ended up, you know, obviously doing it for quite some time. So there, but for the grace of God, kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of how it started. But again, if for anyone that's been in door work, that's done security or that sort of thing, you know, it follows a pathway. You get asked if you want to get involved, or back then anyway. Now you just get a badge and push. You know, you got asked if you wanted to join in. If you did all right, you got asked back. Eventually, they'd stop asking you back. You just sort of be expected to be there, and all of a sudden, you're sort of you know, you're part of the team. And before you know what's going on, you're dressing all in black. You're going out on a Sunday night, and security's your life. You know. And that's kind of what happened.
Matt, how did you sort of develop skills of learning to talk to different people? Because obviously you're dealing with drunk people on drugs, you know, so you're going to get all walks of life. So can you run us a little bit of how you deal with these different types of people?
Yeah. So Again, this is something that I talk about quite often when I'm talking about soft skills and communication and things, because it's something that people pay lip service to often, but they don't necessarily fully understand it. But essentially, if you're looking at, say, rapport, which is what we're talking about, then there needs to be a connection, there needs to be a similarity somewhere in your mind. You need to think that you and I are alike enough so that we can start to bond or have a relationship. Yeah. And so that comes from all sorts of things: the way you stand, the way you move, the words that you say, how you present yourself, all of those kind of things. So to put it in its basic term, if you've got a bricklayer, or a scaffolder or somebody of that nature, a working man that's just finished shift, used to being on building sites, reading the Sun newspaper, so on and so forth. If you got that guy, you're going to address them differently than you would to, say, a doctor or a professor, or a university lecturer or somebody like that. You would address. I'm not saying that you treat them differently, as in one's better, but you would approach them differently. You would have a different conversation. You would use a different dialogue. And so when you're looking at that sort of thing, that's one of the easiest ways to think about this is pitching yourself at the right level right from the word go. So from your very opening movement or sentence or whatever it is pitched at the right level straight away. So that's one of the easiest things to say. One of the things that I was told, which can be helpful, one of the things I was told years ago, I was talking to a medium, the like the psychics.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm not dismissing people that believe in this, by the way. So this is just one person. And I was speaking to this person, and he was a professional medium. It's how he made his living. And he said, I work in circles. And this was when I was like experimenting with all sorts of things, because I found all these elements fascinating. And he said, I work in circles. So we start with smaller circles and we get bigger and bigger, or rather we start big and we get small. Right. So you make assumptions about people based on things. So you look at how they're dressed, you look at how they walk, you look at, have they got tattoos? They look at their fingers. Do they nicotine stain? Do they chew their nails? Are they wearing a wedding ring? You look at all of these factors. What kind of shoes they're wearing, what kind of clothes they've got on, who are they with? All of these things you take into account, and that's, if you like, one of the outer layers. Their age, also all that sort of thing. And so that gives you then a scope to work with. So in the instance of this medium, he would say, okay, so if you're talking about a working class person who's 40 or above, almost certainly they would have lost somebody close to them. Right, that's almost a given. Right, so that's your first circle, and then it's a case of trying to figure out, who that person is, and you keep coming down through these circles. Now, the same applies when you're dealing with people on the door. I don't want to deal with them when they're right stood there. I don't want to be reacting. I want to be the active participant in this. So if I'm doing my job properly, I've seen these people approaching 50, 60 yards away, whatever my eye line is. Right. And I'm making assumptions on them as they come towards me, so that I know how to pitch my initial conversation. So all of these things factor in, and they make a huge difference. They really do. But that's something I think that comes with practice. I don't think you can teach that on a 3-day course in a classroom, being honest with you.
Yeah. So Matt, obviously what we're just talking about there, talking to different people in different ways. At what sort of point, obviously, if you've got a drunk teenager, obviously they don't need to be rough handled out, more escorted out. But what point do you know that someone's going to be trouble? No matter what you say to them, it's just going to blow up. What sort of positions you put your mind in then that you're going to have to take action?
It's a bit of a hard one, isn't it, in that regard, because a lot of dogs bark, don't bite, and some bite and don't bark, sort of thing. So it's kind of hard to know to a degree. But I in the nicest possible way, I worked on the premise where I would anticipate the worst and hope for the best, right? So, and this was something that, again, I talked about when I finished working the doors. And again, I'm going on a little bit, but these are little stories that make it make sense, right? I was working with a guy who was military, and he spent a lot of time working privately for various people. And he was basically checking under the vehicles, and we was walking down the street, checking under vehicles. And he was looking at all the window lines, right, as we was walking down the road. And we weren't working at this point. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, I can't help it. It's just natural to me, right? So he was basically checking for snipers and things, right? And I thought, okay, right, fair enough. I don't particularly ever want to be living a life where that is my new normal, you know, where that's how I have to be. But then it turns out that when I finished working on the doors, when I finished in security, it was only then when the decompression started that I realized that, you know, I was actually speaking to everyone, and I mean everyone, like the cashier at the co-op getting a loaf of bread, the bank staff, you know, the neighbor over the hedge. I was looking at them all and visualizing how I was going to hit them if I had to, you know. And that sounds a bit over the top, but back then at the time, every conversation I had in a work environment could have led to that outcome very, very easily, and often it did. So,
Yeah.
you know, you needed to be ready for that. So that's how I approached, like I said, every sort of conversation. And it was only afterwards that I sort of realized how embedded that was within me. I still get into trouble now for doing my doorman pose, as it gets called. You know, I get a nudge like that in photos and things, you know.
Yeah, when you're just saying about that, like when you'd go and talk to a cashier, it just sprung to mind. So when you're working on a door, obviously you're looking around at your surroundings as well. So did that also come into play, that type of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah. I still do that
Yeah,
now. Yeah, I still
yeah,
do that now. I mean, the thing is, I haven't worked the door now for quite a few years. I mean, once I left frontline work, I still did a lot of training security. I still did a lot of some private stuff. So I still was involved for quite some time. I did a lot of event management things and some consulting. But when I actually left the door specifically, I say there were two things that have embedded in me that I can't seem to shift even now. So number one, as I said, was this focus on how I would deal with somebody preemptively if it was needed, but I've sort of weeded that out now a lot. So the second thing is that scan, you know, that 3 inches above the eye line, wherever I am, and I still do that to this day. And again, you just sort of you just get this sense, if you like. So, you know, I'll be sat there with friends and we'll be out or doing something. And I'll go out and kick over. It's going to kick off over there in 5 minutes. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, there it goes. Again, these are just skills you develop over time, isn't it?
yeah. So Matt, is there any examples you could give us of where sort of your martial arts has really helped you in your door situation?
Well, there's sort of lots of times, I'm sure. In fact, I would say every time it's helped. Whether that just be in the sense of how I carry myself, how I approach things, because I'm. This is something that I'm very big on, right? And I don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody, but if you walk around the corner and there's a big ass Rottweiler snarling and barking at you, you're going to react to that different than if you walk around the corner and there's this little chihuahua yapping away, right? So no, I think your bearing, I think the way you carry yourself, your physical presence, your you know, what looks like your capability, that has a bearing on how things pan out, right? So, you know, I think innately people can see that as well. And so a lot of the times I think what could have gone pear-shaped didn't, because of my bearing and because of the way that I sort of had that sort of conversation. So I think lots of times it saved me like that. If we're talking generally physical, then one of the last incidents that I had was this guy attacked me with a bottle. And it was essentially the reason why I ended up quitting the doors, because I'd used up, you know, all of my 9 lives kind of thing. And so long story short, this guy, he'd been trying to pickpocket students in the club, and he said to the kid that he was stealing from, who caught him red-handed, that he was going to stab him up if he said anything. But anyway, the kid spoke to me. So I bundled this guy out the club, and he was, you know, kicking and spitting and all the rest of it, but bundled him out. And I thought, fair enough, you know, as you do, it's like done deal. So he had a little shout and he wandered off. Anyway, 2 minutes later, he comes here asking back around the corner with a broken bottle. Whoosh, tried to upside the side of my head with it. Now, I mean, I wish I could say I did all this fancy stuff, but I didn't. You know, I just threw my arm up, managed to deflect the bottle, and managed to contain him until the police come. Right. I didn't do anything fancy. I didn't do anything crazy, and it's one of those where I'd love to say, "Oh, I did all this fancy stuff." I didn't, but I also say that if I hadn't have done a lot of that training within the martial arts, a lot of that pressure stuff, a lot of that just general stick the gloves on and knock the snot out of one another, you know, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have reacted in the way that I did and covered up as well as I did. Luckily, it was a cold winter's night. Luckily, I had my big, you know, sort of Crombie coat on, so no real damage done. But after that, I thought, you know what, I'm not getting any younger. I've had plenty of lucky escapes. You know, I've got scars and bruises, my hands are battered and nose is knackered, and but nothing that's gonna, you know, impact my life massively, you know, so I'm lucky. So that was the time where I thought, you know what, let's call that a day.
Yeah, I think as well now, I mean, obviously I'm going to ask you for your own opinion, but the standard of doorman, as sort of years have gone on, have sort of got less and less, more like sort of shirt fillers, haven't they? So like more of the, how do you feel with like the safety of a team around you with that sort of the weak links in there?
Yeah, oh, that was becoming an issue. Yeah. So the first thing when I started training, when the SIA first came in, and it was basically you had to do the weekend course for all of the existing door staff, right? The physical intervention, the PI. That was great because you basically just had a room full of airy ass dudes with noses like this that have been through the wars, and they'd all sit there glaring at you, going, "Show me something, fat boy," you know. And you had to earn that respect. And it was we always had a great weekend. I used to love teaching those. But then as that time went past and we ended up getting to the point where people had to do the week's training and everything else, it did start to get watered down. And when I say watered down, I don't mean like just a little bit. I mean, it got to the point where people I absolutely would not trust on a door at all were sailing through the SIA requirements because they're set such a low bar. They're set to pass, not to fail. And I found it really hard because initially I was failing people and being told, no, you can't fail them because they've hit the criteria. You know, your standard isn't, would you work with them? Because that's how I was judging people. The standard had to be, you know, have they done enough to pass, and which they had. So as the years progressed, because I did this for over a decade, and so as the years progressed, I would say that yes, the standard, you know, overall has got worse. It's not that there aren't good people in the industry, because there are, and there's not good people coming through, because there is, but they are now in the minority, I think.
How do you find, obviously, over the years, the sort of the rules changed a lot as well, and a lot of CCTV was introduced, so you sort of more covering your own arse, so to speak, wasn't you? Rather than so how did that play on you? For obviously now, instead of having to clump someone, you got cameras watching you. So did you adjust to that sort of system as well?
Yeah, you got to. Yeah, you've got to. Again, it's one of those where if you, I've mentioned Jeff a couple of times just because he was so pivotal at that time. If you go back to the Jeff Thompson circa 1992, 93, there was no YouTube, there was no camera phones. CCTV was a very rare thing at that point. So, you know, if there was an issue in your club, you sorted it out. It was your responsibility to sort out, and you did it as a team. And that's how it went. You know, now with the input of CCTV, town radios, all the rest of it, it's gone from having that extra ability to get help when you need it as a crutch to now something that's actually hamstringing you completely. I mean, I would hate to be security these days, because everybody knows that you can't really do anything to them, but there's nothing stopping them doing whatever they like to you. And it's I always say to people, if there's two teams and they're going to play a game of football, and you say to the one team they can do whatever they like, and the other team has to follow this very rigid set of rules, but team A, the ones that can do whatever they like, they know this, you know, who's going to win that football game? And it's really, that's how it is. So it's a losing, you know, it's a losing game for anyone that gets into it now. And unfortunately, with the, you know, with the police being squeezed, with the political landscape changing, so that the police role is changing as well. They're, you know, they're looking at less and less crime. They're if you look at their assault numbers, if you look at the actual statistics of people that are prosecuted for things like muggings and street violence and things like that, it is appallingly low. I mean, unbelievably low. So when you look at all of that, you think, why on earth would anybody these days want to get a job in security, right? Unless they absolutely had to. And that's, I think, where the problem lies, because it used to be a job where people had pride in, and they worked hard to get there, right? And it had a kudos to it. You know, you were somebody if you were security at the local nightclub. You know, back then you were somebody. That was a name. You know, that was recognition. Now you're just some low paid somebody that did a 4-day course and could be changed in a second.
Yeah. Matt, just going to ask you, how did you find, in your own personal sort of experiences, did you come up with the police sort of with you on your side, or sometimes against you in a Doorman situation?
Yeah, good and bad. Mixture of both, really. Again, it depended on the particular officer or person. Um, it's a tough one because I've seen them be really bad, right? And I've seen them make some really piss poor decisions. Sorry, I'm not sure whether I can swear on here, but
It's all right, mate. No, cool.
and I've also seen very young, and on the same as Doorstaff, I've seen very, very young, unconfident people be given a power that they can't really handle properly and abuse it. And I think that's again one of the issues with the way that they're brought on now, the way they're recruited, the way they're trained. I don't know, but I think there's an issue across the board um, with that old school style of policing, in the same way that old school door supervisor. Um, and I think sometimes that can be challenging because there's no denying they've got an incredibly difficult job to do. They're clearly not really trained enough for a lot of it, because there's no way they can be trained enough for a lot of it. They do some incredibly difficult work. So my hat's off to the people that do that. But yeah, I would have liked them to have been more on our side a little bit sometimes. It's not having done it for a long time and having worked in a lot of the clubs for a long time and been around a long time. It's not as if I was a completely unknown entity, in the sense that it's not as if, oh, this is a person, we've not met him before, we're going to take the word of this other person that you've just smacked the shit out of them. It's like, I've been doing this for years now. Surely that should give you some indication that I've at least got a basic handle on my job, and I don't go around smacking people upside the head unnecessarily. But there you go.
So, Matt, I'm just going to go over something else we just sort of covered a little bit. We're talking about confidence within sort of martial arts, bringing out, and obviously in the situation of a fight or an argument, having confidence. How did you find that within, like, sort of new doorman coming into that role of a job without a sort of martial art background, like, so not having that confidence that a martial art would have in yourself?
Yeah. Well, I've seen again. I've seen both sides of that coin. So I've worked with, I worked with some guys who've never set foot in a gym in their life, but they grew up in some of the worst sinker states in the UK, and they've grown up fighting, and and they're like one man gangs. There's no play acting or LARPing going on there. These guys learnt the blooming hard way, and so so I've worked with those guys, and I've also worked with martial artists of all ilk. I've worked with some that were brilliant. I've worked with others that claim to be super duper great and were winning competitions and things in their style, but got absolutely battered the first time it kicked off because they just weren't prepared for that. Their toolbox wasn't the right tools for that job. And again, it's one of the stories that I talk about in my book, that there's a particular episode of that where quite a high level martial artist won lots of competitions, got the absolute heck kicked out of him, and it was over in seconds. But I know for a fact, if you'd have put those two people, the person that did it and the martial artist, if you'd have put them in the martial artist environment, the other guy wouldn't have stood a chance. But that's the nature of it. So I think it can be a double-edged sword. I think it can be great, and it can really help in lots of ways. But I also think that the first step on that is to understand its limitations and not think that it's this loaded gun that you can just pull out whenever you want. Because for the most part, it's not.
I think that's like you say. Sometimes you can teach technique to people, but you can't teach them to have heart, can you?
No, oh no, that's right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Yeah, but it's a little bit more than that, because there is, so if you take as an example, I've seen a guy go in for a double leg, right, and shatter his kneecap on the pavement. I've seen another guy pull somebody in a rear naked on the dance floor and get his head kicked around like a football. So the techniques themselves, they need to be changed to fit the environment sometimes. So it's not that they're not viable techniques. Of course they are. They can be great in, it's making them fit. And so quite often you'll see people come unstuck because they're doing what they would do in a martial arts setting, a matted floor, nice lights, everyone's in their outfit, everyone's warmed up, everyone's ready to go, that sort of thing. So it's interesting when you look at it. And so the people that are willing to learn and I mean everybody, the people that are willing to learn, then they can pick up 90% of what they need to get just by paying attention and watching the guys that are working, right? But it's that 10%, like you said, it's that heart, it's that ability to not get stuck in, that's not the right word, but that ability to be able to meet whatever is being given.
So, Matt, can I just jump back a little bit now? So, obviously, you're a former world champion in martial arts. Can we just touch a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, it's nowhere near as exciting as it sounds. I used to compete many, many years ago, and I used to enjoy doing that. I had a really pretty substantial back injury for a number of years, and that took me out of everything for a while. And then a few years ago, I had the chance to go back and have a try. So I did. I ended up doing continuous kickboxing and some points kickboxing and a thing called sports sword, which is essentially hitting each other with foam bats. It's great fun. It's there's a lot of great skills to be got from it, footwork, timing, all the rest of it. And so I ended up coming away from that because I basically I seeded at the nationals. I only went there for a bit of fun with a friend. I thought, oh, I might as well have a go while I'm here. So I seeded for the nationals and then ended up having a go at it. So I ended up coming out with a gold at the sports sword, a silver and a bronze in the kickboxing. So, you know, by that stage, I was late 40s, hadn't competed for 16, 17 years, and on the back of a pretty substantial back injury. So it was just, you know, it's not as grandiose as it sounds, honestly.
It's good though, isn't it, to still be able to step back in and give yourself a goal to aim for, or challenge yourself again.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It was enjoyable. The process, because I had I had about 3 months to prepare and try and get myself into some kind of shape. So you know, I enjoyed that. But what I did find, and these are things that you just can't argue with because that's just the natural order of things. I was during the preparation, I was doing a lot of sparring and a lot of stuff with squad members that were like 20 years younger than me, and I just crikey, their speed. You know, my reflexes aren't what they were. Their speed is much quicker. You know, the cardio needed to keep the pace, all that sort of thing. You know, the older you get, the more that goes away, and you can't deny it, and you can't pretend it's otherwise. So that was a real eye opener, getting in with some of those youngsters who were at the peak of what they do, and finding out that, my goodness me, even though you still think you've got it, you haven't really, not to that level anymore.
Matt, also, can we touch a little bit on your Amazon best-selling author?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I've written 4 books so far, 1 or 2 more on the way. At the moment, that's on hold for the PhD, but we're sort of doing that in the background. So the first one was the Modern Samurai, which is the dual supervisor stuff. So I look at the private security world. So that was the first one I wrote, and that was done well just because lots of people was asking about it, and lots of people had misconceptions about it. So you know, a lot of people think that Doorman are thick. They're stupid, they're thugs, they're bullies, they're this, that, and the other. And I was sort of tired of hearing that, to be honest with you, because that's not my experience. Obviously, there are people like that, but there's loads of good people as well. And then also there was a lot of people that were asking questions about it all the time. Again, it's one of those occupations, or at least it was then, that it had that bit of mystique to it, that bit of mystery to it, that little bit of danger, you know, that aura of something unusual. And so lots of people would have lots of questions. So I thought, oh, I'll write a book about that. So I half wrote it. And then I thought, what am I doing? I left school with no qualifications. I haven't got a clue. You know, what the heck am I doing writing a book? So I shoved it in a drawer for a couple of years. Eventually got it back out and finished it. And to my delight, I'm very pleased to say, it did really, really well. It was well received by you know, the sort of industry people and martial artists and stuff, and got to #1 in Amazon twice, and yeah, just I was really, really pleased and humbled by lots of people saying that they really enjoyed it, and that was the intention. It wasn't, I didn't want to write one of those, you know, sort of hard man books, you know, this is chapter 1, I beat the snot out of this person, chapter 2, I beat the snot out of the other person, you know, that I didn't want that. So I tried to make it as sort of as normal as possible. So there's humor in it, you know, there's life stories in it, there's just a lot of just human nature overall in there. So there is violence, of course, it's the nature of the beast, but I tried not to focus on that specifically. So on the back of that, I wrote Journey Up the Mountain, The Road to Black Belt, which was about my martial arts sort of stuff. And there's lots of vinaigrettes and stories and just random stuff in there, and it's all just kind of bunched in, and lots of just memories and recollections and things. And again, that got to #1 as well, which I was again really pleased with. So so then I wrote this self-defense book for kids, which was great fun, and that's something I've got to expand out on. I've been meaning to do that for ages, and but that was a bit of fun. And then the last book that we did was Online Martial Arts Evolution or Extinction, which I wrote with Kai Morgan, and we did that just before we went into lockdown. So that's a conversation around exactly that, online martial arts, and where that's going to go, how that's going to look, how it's going to affect us. So it doesn't draw any conclusions, so it doesn't come down either it's great or it's awful. But it just explores lots of different ideas around that. And again, that got to #1 at Amazon, which is fantastic. So so I've got 2 more on the go, which I'm sort of trying to write when I can, but with the business and with the PhD study and everything, there's finding the time, and the Festival of Martial Arts, of course, which is taking a great deal of my time at the moment. Trying to fit it all in is hard work, as I'm sure you know. You're a busy guy yourself.
Can we get a little insight off your new books you're writing, or is that secret at the minute?
No, that's fine. So I can. There's one which is around the other side of what I do, which is short form video and social media, that sort of thing. So it's basically more of a business marketing kind of thing on that, and how people can use that. And then there's 1 or 2 other ones I'm playing with that are more martial arts related. And the one that I'm working at the moment is all about sort of confidence, and some of the things we've discussed today, actually. So a lot of it is about confidence and overcoming fear, and how you communicate with people, and those sorts of things. But that's that's not an easy book to write in a few minutes. There's an awful lot that goes into that. So that's something that's I've been coming back and forwards to for a few years now. So hopefully at some point that will come out.
Okay, Matt, so you've just touched on something there. You mentioned the Festival of Martial Arts. So you're the co-organizer of the Festival of Martial Arts. So let us into what it is and what it's all about.
Yeah, so the festival itself is on the first weekend of July, starts on Friday the 30th, so it's only a couple of weeks away now. The idea of that was essentially Glastonbury with martial arts. So if you think about a music festival, if you think about the vibe of a music festival, if you think about how exciting that is and all the stuff that goes around it, but then you stick some martial arts in it, and that's kind of what you get. So the idea has been bubbling away for a while, but I went to look at this venue, and I was looking at it just for like a small one-day event for about 150 people, and I was going to basically hire a portion of it for that day. And the event venue itself was just so phenomenal. It's this wonderful place in Somerset, and it looks out over these rolling hills. They've got all these absolutely staggering glamping pods and things, and I mean it's just an amazing place. So I said to the manager, what's the number for the whole thing for the whole weekend? So he gave me this number. I had a little bit of a wobble, and then I thought, okay, right, let's do it. Right, let's book it. Let's just go for it, because, well, there's a reason why I'm here. There's a reason why I'm in this space looking at it now. So so I ran with it, and then I thought, okay, well, this is such a big endeavor, and it's such a possibility of the future as well, because it's not just today and this one, it's the years to come, because the idea is to grow it year on year. So I thought, well, what can I do to give it the best chance of success? Now, I've got lots of event planning experience and things like that, and I've been around music festivals for a long time with work, so that's great. But then I looked at Lucci, who does Kaizen, Lucci Delgado.
Yeah,
And Lucci's well, Lucci's a great guy. He really is. And I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but when you first look at Lucci, you think he's laid back, he's friendly, he's sort of, you're like, how does he get anything done? But he creates this marvelous event Kaizen that he does year on year, and I watched him the other day. Right, we did Kaizen the other day, and it was extraordinary. He spent the entire time just flitting around, dealing with things, no stress, he didn't look flustered once at all. Right, and the whole day was a marvelous success. So anyway, I managed to talk him into coming on board, so we've partnered up on this now, and and that looks like that's going to move on into the future. So between him and I, we've managed to get together a great bunch of instructors, a great bunch of activities. We've got bushcraft there. We've got lots of kids stuff going on, big inflatables and things. We've got fantastic food and music, and it's just going to be an absolutely awesome event. So there's camping options, there's day ticket options. You can come for the weekend. We're a few miles outside of Frome, less than half hour from Bath. So if you didn't fancy camping, there's all kinds of options that can be taken up. So so we're really looking forward to that. That's coming, as I say, first weekend of July, and it's great. We've got some really good names involved.
Yeah, is that sort of a mixture of all martial arts there, Matt?
Yeah,
we got something for everyone.
Yeah, we got all kinds of martial arts. So you've got all your sort of your normal ones that you can sort of think about, your karates and what have you. And so we've got 52 blocks coming. We've got Sistema. We've got the world champion shin kicker, which is a traditional English martial art. They're coming along. We've got quite a few really interesting sort of martial arts that aren't necessarily that common, which is great as well to have those kind of things. Plus, obviously, we've got some really high level BJJ guys and top class karate guys and some kung fu guys, and again, really good Wing Chun guys, Krav guys, all those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, and can the people that come to that show get involved in it as well and sort of join in? And
that's the hope.
Watch.
No, that's the hope. They come and they join in. Yeah. So the idea is that if they buy a day ticket, that day ticket gets them in through the gate, and it gets them the ability to get involved. So it's not like you pay one price to get in and then you've got to pay another price to train. It's you pay once, that's it, and it's yours. And that's what we want, is people to join in, get on each other's mats, get involved, learn some new things. Make a fool of yourself a little bit. That's kind of the whole point. So if you're an instructor, what we want to do with this is, go explore some other instructors, get some things to add into your toolbox, have a few things to take away, have some great fun with it, because one of the things that I'm really big on, and it annoys me when I see it, is when you see these multi-discipline events, especially the bigger ones, and an instructor will swan in, they'll do their session, and then they won't engage with anybody else's session at all, and they don't get involved. They won't get on anyone else's mats. Now, whether that's because they don't want to look stupid, or whether it's because they're too important in their own mind to do that, or whatever, I don't know. And that's fine. But for me, part of the point of this is that, get involved, get involved, get on other people's mats. If you look a bit silly, nobody cares, because hey, that's one of the best things about it. What we need to remember, and some of us often forget, especially as instructors, is that we started martial arts because we wanted to learn martial arts. And so if that hasn't changed, if you still feel that way, this is a golden opportunity to learn martial arts.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea as well, like bringing everyone together, because years ago it was very separate, wasn't it? If you'd done karate, kickboxing, whatever, you sort of frowned upon the other disciplines. Where now I think it's great to mix and learn new stuff, and it's something for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally, yeah. And it's again, it's an opportunity to dip your toe in with stuff. It's a great way to meet like-minded individuals, and so, as I say, we've got some great instructors coming along, and it's not just about the mat time. It's not just about being on the mat and doing the physical training. It's about those conversations around the fire afterwards. It's about those chats in between stuff. It's about that sort of organic kind of whatever that comes from putting a bunch of people that really like the same sort of things together in a space, whatever morphs out of that, which I'm sure lots of things will. So it's all that as well.
Yeah, you're also a public speaker. Can we just have a little bit of information about your public speaking?
Yeah, well, this is something that I've sort of fallen into a little bit over the past couple of years. I talk a lot with the business that I run, the social media stuff. So I talk at a lot of business summits, a lot of conferences. I talk into a lot of business groups and things. I go into schools and things. So I talk about any number of things, really. I started, again, anybody that's done any kind of instructing, anybody that's been a teacher of any guys, you're already talking from stage. You're already presenting, aren't you? Because that's part of the deal. That's what you need to do to engage the room, whether that be a few students or a great big hall full of people. and so it's just the next step from that. I started talking into schools and things. I was doing a lot for a charity a few years back, and we'd go into schools and we talk to whole assemblies and stuff. And I kid you not, if you want to face your fears, right, stand up in a hall in front of about 500 8 to 11-year-olds all staring at you, going, "Entertain me, bitch." Honestly, that's frightening. And so, yeah, again, that just sort of took off from there with regards to I did some talks for Lackloy's wonderful organization that he does with the motivational things, and I did a talk for them about fear and stuff. And I do a lot of business things and things. So yeah, it's something that I enjoy and I'm looking to do more of. I think there's a real energy about, when you're speaking from a stage, when you're speaking to people, and that's something that I'm looking at more and more, and I enjoy more and more. And again, it's a great way to confront your own fears and your own inadequacies and your own things that you're frightened of. Because just because I'm a bit old and battered now and can't compete with the young guys in that physical space anymore, it doesn't mean to say I don't want to challenge myself and I don't want to compete in whatever arena I can compete in. So it's either that or golf. No.
Matt, just going to throw a few random questions at you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Was there who inspired you, or did you have an inspiration growing up who you sort of looked up to in the martial arts world?
Oh, well, there's the obvious, isn't there? There's the Bruce Lees and that sort of thing. I was a big fan of the show Monkey. I don't know whether you can remember that.
Monkey, I loved
Back
Monkeys.
in the day. Yeah, I was a great fan of that when I was young.
Yeah.
So there was wrestlers like Iron Fist, that he was one of the martial arts wrestlers of the day back on the Saturday afternoon Big Daddy era. So it was, essentially it was people like those originally, because that was all that I sort of had access to. You had sort of David Carradine with Kung Fu on the television and those kind of things. So they were the kind of people at that stage that sort of emulated and wanted to be like. And that's kind of it really at that point.
Okay. Favorite martial art move?
Okay. Well, one that's always served me well in all kinds of areas is a good old fashioned front kick, my Gary. It's basic, it's simple, but yeah, it's done me well over the years.
My next one is, it may be the same answer. I was going to ask you, what was your favourite move that sort of used to get you out of trouble on the doors? Possibly could be the same one.
Yes, but lower. So I do that a lot. So I would do that a lot on people's shins when they were getting antsy on the doors. So if you get those people that are just not quite there enough to, where you can go full nuclear, but they were enough to cause problems and needed sort of. So that level, a good swift toe punt in the shins with me boots on, that quite often did the trick.
All right, I'm gonna get you to dig deep now, Matt. Have you got any funny stories on the door you can tell us?
Well, again, there's loads. There's lots in the book that I've written. There's all kinds of silly stuff, really. I mean, there's everything from the the absolute absurd to the ones that are just a bit more sad than anything else. So, and everything in between. There's the story of working in an inner city club, one of these ones on the housing estates with all the barbed wire around it and stuff, where they go out and steal shit to order, that kind of stuff, and the kids on the BMXs are outside the pool selling the drugs and whatnot, so you set the scene. And in the loo the one day, and the head comes over the cubicle, toothless thing, one of the locals, like, "Do you want to buy a frozen chicken?" Waving this frozen chicken that they just stolen. So you've got things like that, memories like that, and then you've got ones that are a little bit sort of a little bit more fun, if you like. So there was this lady. I'm going to use the term lady loosely, but nonetheless, I'm going to say lady. At the time, I was working security on a hotel, and so I would basically work the venue, and then I would go over to this hotel and work through the night, right? And it was a one-man door, this hotel. It was right on the sort of the waterfront of Bristol, so it basically got lively very regularly. It was right next to some of the biggest clubs, and you had people, they'd go there, they'd book a room for a few hours, they'd do whatever they did with people they just met at the club, and so on and so forth. So a lot of stag do's, a lot of things. So it was colourful. We had a lot of fun there. But there was this one particular evening, there was a young lady. She turned up with this guy, and they were arguing, right? And they wanted a room, right? Now, they was like doing that whole drunken thing. There was a massive Great Oceana club just a couple of doors away. They'd obviously sort of like met there and wandered over. Excuse me. One of them didn't have any money, and the other one had a card, but no money, right? So one had money, no card, blah, blah. So they wanted to book a room, and the basically at the hotel at the time, it couldn't take money, could only take card. Okay, so the girl paid with the card, and the guy gave her the money. Okay, now they went off to the room. Lo and behold, 20 minutes later, they're back. They're screaming obscenities at each other. I mean, they're properly having a go at one another, right? And they storm off in different directions. And I'm thinking, fine, that's great. They're at the hotel. They're not my problem anymore. They've gone off into the night, off they went. Anyway, half an hour later, she's back, but with another guy, right? And they're sticking their tongue down each other's throats, and they disappear into the lift and the lobby, and off they pop. 20 minutes later, the original guy turns up. Right, and he's like, I want to go to my room. And reception like, well, you can't go to your room because it's not your room. You didn't pay for it. It's on her card. Right. So you can't go up to the room. It's not your room. Right. Of course, I've got to intervene at this point because he's getting like flipping full on antsy. And I feel for the guy. I really do. But I'm like, I'm really sorry, mate. You can't, you can't go out there. It's not your room. You haven't brought the room. And he's like, but I give her the money. So that's nothing that we can do anything about, So anyway, he goes out in a huff. And he sits on his coat just around the corner from the front doors, watching the front doors of the hotel, right? And so I'm stood there. I'm like, fair enough. He's not, he's not bothering anybody. He's just sort of sat there. He probably don't know what else to do with himself. And we're talking the wee small hours now. And I finished my shift at about 5 a.m. Right, so that's what time I normally finish. So I was just wrapping up, and I was just leaving, and I'd walked just a little bit away from the door. I'd signed out and everything, and I heard this commotion. I looked round. The woman with the guy that she took up earlier on had come out through the double doors to have a fag with this new lad. The old lad had seen them, pounced on the new lad, and they were all of them brawling around on the floor in this great big bundle. So again, it's one of those, what you do with that sort of thing, I mean.
Matt, have you got any inspiring words you can give to the youngsters, either for not going down the wrong path or ones that may benefit from getting into martial arts and following that sort of path?
So yeah, all joking aside, I mean, realistically, what I say to people is, when people tell you that you can't, don't believe them. It's a real simple thing. If you want something, go for it. Don't listen to people saying that you can't. If you want to go for it, and don't let your fear stop you. That's fundamentally the thing, isn't it? You'll know yourself. But that's where martial arts, I think, is at its best, because it helps to teach us to go past what we think we're capable of.
So Matt, where can people find you or follow you or get in touch with you if they want to look into more of what you do or your books and stuff, or speak to you personally?
Yeah, well, obviously, Matt Stait on the screen. You can stick that into Facebook, Google all the usual suspects, and I'll pop up somewhere. If you want to see the martial arts kind of stuff, then you could stick in modernsamurai.online. That's the name of my club, by the way. I don't believe I'm a reincarnation of a feudal warrior from Japan. So that's, yeah, so you'll get that as well from there. Or if you want the social media side of what I do, then it's, differentthink.co.uk, and that will take you there.
Okay, Matt, thank you ever so much for coming on. We round it up there. It's been appreciated. It's been great listening to your stories. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, Lee, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And Matt, before we go, can we just have the date again of the Festival of Martial Arts for everyone?
Yeah, so that's the first weekend of July, Friday through to the Sunday, 30th of June, 1st and 2nd of July.
Hey, make sure you check it out, everyone. Get on it. Thank you.